Good morning. I am so excited to be on the stage this morning. As Pastor Dan said, I'm the youth pastor here at Canton, Naz, and I asked for a little bit of grace this morning because I'm the youth pastor. And so I kind of roll with punches. This morning in our first service, I had some technical difficulties with the PowerPoint. Hopefully it works this morning here for us as we stream on TV. But I asked for a little bit of grace as we kind of get through this. And this week this last few weeks, we've been going through a series called Stress Out, right? And if you can't tell, like this morning, I was a little stressed out because my PowerPoint didn't work. And you know what happened right before I did the PowerPoint, and like before I came on stage, Pastor Dan looked at me and said, "Everything's set up." I'm like, "Yeah, we're good." And of course, nothing works. When it was time to shine, it didn't work. And I was a little flustered, to say the least. But we talked about stress out, and last 2 weeks we talked about some awesome topics. And if you hadn't had the chance to listen to these sermons, you can go on our Canton Naz app and you can watch the sermons or even go through some of the notes there. But as we talked about stress, our first week we talked about money. Money was the thing that really stresses a lot of people out. And so we talked about money and finances, and Pastor Dan gave some really great practical tips as well as spiritual advice about our money. And then the week after that, we talked about work. We talked about the stresses of work and how things affect us in our everyday life, and he gave us spiritual guidance on that as well. And this week, I get to talk to you about comparison. I mean, comparison is like an everyday life type of thing, right? I mean, everybody compares everything to everything, right? And we do these series. If you weren't here on Easter Sunday we did a little survey. You marked a little box and said things that kind of stress you out. And we do these surveys not because we want to pick on people, not because we want to call you out and say, "Oh, you're horrible at this." We want you to grow as Christians. We don't want you to get stuck in ruts. We don't want you to be the same today as you were yesterday in your spiritual walk with God. And so this might ring a tune to you, right? And as a church, we strive to pursue God at all times so that we can make a difference in our community. And it comes from getting to know God and finding freedom out of our ruts, and then continuing to discover purpose with our God that he has in store for us. Does that sound familiar to anybody? I'm sure you've never seen this before on our walls or heard it from a sermon before. That's our mission of a church. Our church has this mission to know God, find freedom, discover purpose, and make a difference. Not so that our spiritual walk doesn't stay stagnant, but also that we can encompass and help others in their spiritual walk. So today, as we get ready for the top of comparison, before we get there, I want to say Happy Mother's Day to all you mothers. It's a pretty eventful day at my house, actually, because Megan was born. My wife is Megan. She was born in the beginning of May, so every now and again, it happens to be her birthday on Mother's Day. So today is her birthday. I'm not going to say how old she is, but I'll tell you, this next week, we have our anniversary. It's 15 years that we've been married, and she got married at me when I was 20, or she was 20, so you can do the math. If you can do the math, you deserve to know how old she is. But today's her birthday and Mother's Day, so she got a cream stick this morning, and she's good for the rest of the day. So we're so happy that you can celebrate with us on Megan's birthday and your Mother's Day. It's awesome to be here. But I just want to talk a little bit about comparison. So comparison is something, as Brian said, a lot of mothers have to deal with, but not just mothers. Everybody has to deal with a lot of comparison in our own lives, and it affects us all. So this morning we're going to kind of talk about how it affects us, and we're going to go through scriptures with Jesus, Paul, and King David. We're going to talk about what they said about comparison and how we can tackle it differently. And so I'm going to be honest, comparison is something that I deal with a lot in my own life. And I think we all deal with comparison a lot. We all play different roles in life, and some of the roles we always are compared in. And so I wanted to point out a few roles. We won't hit all the topics, of course, but I wanted to point out a few roles that I feel like are significant. You're significantly compared in. And so one of the top roles that I would think that you're compared in is being a parent. Sometimes we're easily compared by our parent styles, how we treat our kids, what we do with our kids, how we discipline our kids, do we not discipline our kids, how many vacations we take with our kids, how many times do we lock them in a cage, all kinds of things, right? And then not only that, but we're also compared on how our kids act or how smart our kids are. It's all encompassed in parenting. And sometimes we can really feel defeated by all that comparison. Another one is maybe siblings. Sibling rivalry is kind of fun sometimes, but sometimes as it gets further and further into it, it distorts our relationship and damages our relationship between our siblings. Jobs. I mean, jobs is an easy thing to be compared to, right? We have policies, we have job roles that we're supposed to fulfill. But, when I was in sales, I had a job role and I had to meet a quota. And, when sales would just fall on my lap that day, it was easy to be like, I'm the best. I know it. And like look down on everybody else, right? Because they weren't as good as me. But then there's those days where you're pulling tooth and nail just to get a sale. And then you just quietly walk out of the office hoping nobody's gonna compare you to them, right? And then lastly, when it comes to our relationships with our spouse, our partners, we always see those pictures on Facebook, right? And they're never fighting. I never seen a picture of two people fighting at each other. Maybe you have, I have different friends, I guess. But they're always looking so happy, giggling, hugging, smiling at each other for once. And so it can be a really scary place though when we get to that part in our life. If we ever get to that part where we start comparing couples with ourselves, it could really lead us down a path where we start to isolate ourselves from our spouse or our partner. So we're really good at comparing, right? We're really awesome at comparing ourselves with a lot of different things and how we should do things or how we should not do things. But sometimes other people are really good at comparing us too, right? Not always the good thing though. Like I've been compared to a lot of things in life. I've been compared to like a box of rocks one time. I don't know why. I've been compared to how sharp knives were in the tool shed or whatever, something like that. I don't understand why. The joke was on them. I don't have sharp knives. But you know where I'm going with this. We all get made fun of sometimes. And sometimes though, it's all fun and games, but sometimes when somebody says something about you or jokes that way, it starts to hurt us. When we're compared to things by other people, it will start to hurt us. I don't know about you, but when I'm compared to something or someone that is clearly a mark above me, when I'm being compared, I'm discouraged. I feel like I've blotched the job. I blotched the role that I was supposed to fulfill. So here's the problem. We've all been hurt by comparison, and comparison often brings hurt. It may happen when you were a child or a teenager, or maybe even as an adult. But I'm sure you remember that comment that was hurtful, that it might still sit heavy on you today. And most likely it might have happened to you by somebody that was the dearest to you or close to you. And sometimes even after they say that to you, they say, well, I didn't mean that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean that, but the hurt's already done, right? Unfortunately. You lost a lot at that point, the view of yourself maybe, or maybe even the relationship, you lost that relationship or the trust with that person. See, people sometimes compare us to them just to humiliate us, or sometimes just to show us that they're greater than us. And so in Mark chapter 14, we're gonna get into the scripture here in a second. And this is what happens with Jesus and his disciples and his followers. And this is a scene that happens right before Jesus' death. And so the setting is Jesus at the table or dinner with his followers. And this is what it says in scripture. While he was in Bethany, reclining at the table in the house of Simon the leper, a woman came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume, made of pure nard. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume? If it could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money's given to the poor." And they rebuked her harshly. Could you imagine the humiliation that this woman went through? Especially, it was his disciples that were rebuking her. This woman who loved Christ so much was coming to anoint Christ, to bless Christ. She was humiliated. I couldn't imagine a more humiliating time in her life. The friends were laughing and scoffing at her, annoyed that she even had the nerve to even approach Jesus and do this thing. And on top of that, what she did was so wrong in the eyes of the disciple. I can almost imagine them just laughing and degrading that woman for her actions and saying, well, she's just a woman. She don't know what she's doing. Those are fighting words, right? They dared to compare how she would use the gift that she brought for Jesus and how they would use it better because they knew better. That rings true in a lot of our lives, right? You know, when someone then compares us to something, our natural instinct is to go on the defense. We then are to make sure no one ever says that about us again. So we begin to observe others and take notes of others and what they do and how they exceed the expectations of the roles. And then that's when we start comparing notes, right? We study. We just do this so we'll never be humiliated that same way again in front of our peers, our family, or even our friends. We need to outdo them. We need to outdo them and prove that we're better than them. We need to do this. We feel like this urgency to do this. But we need to make a shift in our mindset, church. These hurts will not improve our life. They won't improve our faith. They won't improve our walk with God. When we begin to hurt with a comparison in mind, we're only digging our life into a hole. And it's set by that person who compared us and humiliated us in the first place. And then we work so hard in that one area of our own life so that we can disprove and say, you're wrong. I'm a great mom. I'm great at my job. Look at me after all. We often compare ourselves with other people to only get the approval from our peers, or I should call them our oppressors. Paul speaks this in Galatians chapter 1, that we need to change our mindset. He says, am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. See, when we go seek God first, it will direct the way we're supposed to go. It will not give precedence over God by what people think or say about how we are living our life. See, Paul is really interesting in this letter in Galatians here. He's talking to a church, a region of churches known as Galatia. And Paul, he was already preaching the gospel to them, and he understood, though, that there was the other teachers coming in and preaching the gospel of Christ too, but they were more like impersonators. They weren't teaching the true gospel of Christ, and so we could call them easily false teachers, right? And so they were perversing the gospel, and as Paul heard more and more about this, he became really passionate about tackling this head on, this argument head on. And the thing is he comes to these cities, these regions, and they're listening to these other teachers and starting to compare Paul as a teacher of the gospel to these other people. And if you follow Paul's letters, a lot of his letters, he starts with salutations and thanks and encouragement. But in Galatians, this is how he starts off. But I want to set this straight. He says there boldly here, he says, he doesn't run away. He doesn't go to prison and write another sermon. He stands there boldly. And he says, I seek God first before the approval of man. You can compare me all you want to these other teachers that have come through the region. And I'm sure a lot of you might want to follow them because they're more lenient. But I only look for the approval of God over man. See, when we compare ourselves to others, we're searching to prove ourselves worthy of others rather than of God. And when we do that, we miss the point. We miss the point. In 1 Timothy, it says this, but godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. Our purpose as the Lord has so much more to do with our relationship with Christ than what Christ has given us to do than with other people. What has he placed on your heart? Not your neighbor's heart or your mom's heart or how you are to be or what you're being compared to, but what's on your heart. There's only one person that can give you anything after this world, and that's Jesus Christ, and he will give you life. He proved it himself when he raised again from the dead on the third day from the grave. He's the one who we are supposed to be looking at and trying to impress. For David said in Psalms here that God made us all in a different way. He says, I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. In Jeremiah 29, we all know the verse, right? I say it every graduation Sunday, and we have one coming up here in a couple weeks, and you'll hear it again, Jeremiah 29. We know the verse, for he knows the plans that he has for you, right? He's made for you. But we all know that verse very well, and I'll be sure to mention it here in a couple weeks when we have our graduates up here. But Jeremiah 29:12, though, goes on to say this, then you will call on me and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your hearts. I will be found by you, declares the Lord. When we seek God with all our efforts, people will see Christ in us. We'll be able to do things that people would not thought possible. They don't make connections. Sometimes if you've been part of Christ's mission before, if you followed his spirit before, you've done things beforehand that you didn't even know why you did, but it makes sense now why you did that thing. And there might be some people that still think you're crazy when you do things that are God's way. But I want to circle back to this woman here that was humiliated and hurt by the disciples of Christ. She did what she did because she loved Christ. She loved him so much she felt the need to do this one thing. Maybe she didn't know why she was doing it. Maybe she thought the same thing the disciples thought. But she was listening to the love she had for God. The disciples didn't even know what she was doing. Of course, they were harshly rebuking her because of what she was doing. They tried to prove that she was not as good as them. But this is how Mark finishes this passage here. Leave her alone, said Jesus. Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. And I want to stop right there with beautiful. Beautiful, in the Greek, there's two words for good. It's kalos and agathos. Agathos. And agathos means good, and so does kalos. And kalos is used as this word here as beautiful, but agathos first means good as like truth. That's awesome, good. It could be plain, it could be harsh. It's just good, it's truth. But kalos has a better meaning than just good. It's better than good. The Greek says beyond good, better than good, be beautiful, genuine, authentic. And so when Christ describes the thing that she did, it wasn't just good, but it was beyond good, better than good. And he says this, the poor you'll always have with you. And he's speaking to his disciples, and you can help them anytime you want, but you will not always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. Truly I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. I mean, she did exactly what she was led to. Even though she may have been humiliated, hurt, not sure why she was doing it, she's gonna be remembered. She's not gonna be remembered because she beat someone else out and she was smarter than the disciples, but because she listened to God's Spirit and did what she was needed. I just love the last verse here where it says, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done also will be told in memory of her. I mean, in the most amazing narrative that we have in our Christian Bible is the narrative of God's death and resurrection. And this woman's story was to be told with that story. The good thing that she did, the purpose that she had in life is gonna be told with the crucifixion and death of our Christ. I mean, that shows you how important it is to do what God has laid on our hearts rather than waiting or comparing ourselves with others. See, we could be trapped in a hole, a pit, a trap that somebody set for us because they compared us, and we could be digging at that hole and digging, trying to get up out of it. But we're missing a point because we're trying to prove ourselves to somebody for some reason, rather than listening to what God has on our hearts. So I want us to stand this morning. And as we stand, I want you to think of something that's placed on your heart this morning. As we continue to worship, I want you to think about these things. Maybe you have been placed into a hole and you have not been able to get out of it yet. Maybe you don't know how to get out of it and you need to ask God to help you. Maybe you're just hurt by comparison and you need to ask God to release you from those chains. This morning, I want you to know the altars are open. The altars are always open during our services, during worship, during preaching, anytime. But I want us to examine ourselves. Max is gonna sing a song for us this morning. And as he does, I want us to respond and examine our hearts. If God's tugging on your heart and wants you to come to the altar, go to the altar. Listen to God's Spirit moving in your heart. And as Max comes up and sings for us, I want us to listen to God's Spirit as he sings to us.
Thanks for watching. If this message helped you, share it with someone you know. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you live in the area, we invite you to join us for one of our worship experiences. Go to cantonnazarene.com for times and more information. Hey, thanks for being a part of our virtual community.